The Ben 10 franchise's most consistent creative decision across its entire history was the introduction of a new transformation gimmick with each major series and each major era of the reboot. A gimmick was not simply a visual variation on the standard transformation, it was a mechanic that changed what the Omnitrix could do, how Ben accessed that capability, and what the tactical and narrative implications were for every episode that followed its introduction. Some were accidents, some were deliberate upgrades, some were stolen and repurposed, and at least one was a living creature that attached itself to Ben's watch and started adding extra limbs to his transformations without asking. Here is every Ben 10 gimmick, explained in full. Let's break this down. Combinations and fusions, the original accident. The first transformation gimmick in the franchise's history was the one that Ben did not choose, did not understand, and did not immediately recognize as anything other than the Omnitrix malfunctioning at the most inconvenient possible moment. Combinations were originally an unintentional effect Ben discovered when he transformed with the Omnitrix without its faceplate. The cover had come off during a fight. Ben had been tampering with the device in ways Azmuth had specifically told him not to, and the result was a series of transformations that combined two alien DNA samples simultaneously in the same body rather than selecting one. The specific fusions that the original series produced through the faceplate malfunction were the franchise's first documentation of what alien combination actually looked like when the Omnitrix selection mechanism broke down without the managed encoding that kept each species' DNA separate. Stink Arms combined Stinkfly's aerial capability and slime projection with Forearm's physical strength, a combination that had obvious tactical appeal, but whose actual performance demonstrated that the fusion process without proper protocols produced something weaker than either component alien in isolation. Heat Jaws combined Heat Blast's fire generation with Rip Jaw's aquatic biology, an underwater fire alien whose specific biological contradiction the franchise used to communicate the absurdity of incompatible DNA combinations expressing simultaneously. Diamond Matter combined Diamond Head's crystal biology with Gray Matter's diminutive scale, the most powerful defensive material in the Omnitrix's database delivered in the smallest possible body, the combination producing a form that had Gray Matter's size vulnerability alongside Diamond Head's crystal regeneration. All of the combinations were either incompatible with each other or made the alien's original abilities considerably weaker. The franchise's most specific single acknowledgement that more was not always better when the system responsible for managing the combination was not operating as designed. The gimmick's most significant narrative development came decades later in Omniverse, where Ben 10,000 had taken the original accidental fusions and spent years developing the Biomnitrix, two Omnitrices worn simultaneously that produced deliberate, stable fusions rather than the chaotic, incompatible pairings of the original faceplate accident. The journey from accidental malfunction to deliberate mastery across the franchise's timeline was the gimmick's most complete single arc. The franchise's documentation of what happened when an accident was treated as a learning opportunity rather than simply as a problem to be corrected and forgotten. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite Ben 10 gimmick. Let's get back into the video. Master Control, the gimmick too powerful to keep. The Master Control was the Omnitrix's most significant single functional upgrade and the gimmick most completely defined by being unavailable. Present in the device from the beginning, locked by Azmuth for reasons he considered self-evident, discovered accidentally by Ben, immediately and enthusiastically abused, and then locked again, before it could become the standard mode of operation that Ben had decided it should be. When Ben accidentally discovered and activated the Master Control code, it gave him access to unlimited transformation time with no timeout, instant switching between alien forms without returning to human first, and full access to every alien DNA sample in the database simultaneously rather than the rotational selection the standard Omnitrix allowed. The franchise's most immediate communication of what Master Control felt like in 10-year-old hands was the episode that introduced it. Ben used the unlimited transformation time to participate in a cross-country racing competition rather than to fight crime. The show documenting through the episode's structure exactly how a child with unlimited alien access would actually use that access, which was to do fun things rather than responsible things. The cross-country race was not played as a character failure, but as a character truth, that this was what Ben was, what he had always been, and what Azmuth had apparently anticipated when designing the lock. Azmuth's subsequent reactions to discovering that Ben had unlocked master control, and to Ben's consistent argument across multiple series that he should be given permanent access, were the franchise's most sustained documentation of the gap between power and wisdom. The question was not whether Ben could use master control effectively. He demonstrably could in critical moments when Azmuth temporarily unlocked it for specific emergencies. The question was whether Ben consistently used it responsibly, and the franchise's honest answer across multiple series was that the consistency was not yet reliable enough to justify the permanent unlock that Ben consistently argued for. The lock was not a punishment. It was a calibration. Azmuth's judgment that the right time for the full access and the right level of judgment to accompany it had not yet coincided, which was the franchise's most specifically adult argument about the relationship between capability and maturity. The Ultimatrix and Ultimate Forms, evolutionary escalation. The Ultimate Forms were the franchise's most narratively ambitious gimmick, not simply a power boost or an armor system, but a philosophical argument about what evolution meant, what species could become under sustained extreme pressure, and whether the evolved forms had rights that complicated the ethics of using them as temporary transformations. Ultimate Alien introduces ultimate forms through the Ultimatrix, bringing a new transformation style in which green bands of light wash over Ben's current transformation and evolve them. Some in real time during active combat, some with a sequence-like backdrop that stage the evolution as a dramatic event rather than simply a combat state change. The Ultimatrix was not built by Azmuth. It was Albedo's stolen design, the former assistant's unauthorized construction that included the evolutionary function allowing aliens to be evolved into their most extreme forms as determined by the device's hypothetical evolutionary modeling. Each ultimate form was what the alien species would have become if it had spent millions of years adapting to the most hostile possible environments. Ultimate Humongousaur gaining rocket-launching bone missiles from sustained combat pressure, Ultimate Swampfire producing blue flames through a chemical process that the normal Methanosian's fire generation could not replicate, Ultimate Big Chill combining ice generation with the ability to produce ice as flame-shaped constructs. The episode Ultimate Sacrifice was the gimmick's most philosophically significant single moment. The Ultimate Forms developing consciousness within the Ultimatrix, considering themselves enslaved and demanding independence from a device that was using them as temporary transformations without their consent. The franchise used this episode to engage directly with the ethical question the Ultimate Forms raised. If the evolved versions of Ben's aliens had their own consciousness and their own will, was using them as temporary transformations a form of imprisonment? The resolution, the Ultimate Forms choosing to remain available to Ben rather than departing into their own existence, was the franchise's most specific single narrative engagement with a gimmick's own implications, the commercial product requiring an in-universe reckoning with what it meant to create powerful beings and then use them as tools. Skurd, the living gimmick. The most unusual transformation gimmick in the franchise's history was also the only one that was not a technological system, but a living being. The Slimebiote, who attached himself to Ben's Omnitrix and Omniverse, and offered his services as an on-demand capability enhancement whose specific quality was the quality of a choice rather than a design. Skurd was a Slimebiote, a small symbiotic organism that had evolved to live on and interface with Galvan technology, whose specific ability was to copy and temporarily replicate the physical structures of any alien DNA in the Omnitrix's database and add them to whatever form Ben was currently using as an additional physical element. He could give 4 arms the wings of Stinkfly, add Diamond Head's crystal to Wrath's berserker form, or provide Big Chill's intangibility to an alien that could not phase through matter on its own. The combination options being limited only by what was in the Omnitrix database and what Skurd's own creative assessment of the situation suggested was the most useful enhancement available. The specific quality of Skurd as a gimmick that no other gimmick in the franchise shared was personality. The Slimebiote was a character with opinions about which combinations were aesthetically appropriate, enthusiasm for being useful, and a history with the Omnitrix that gave his presence narrative weight beyond the tactical function he served. His opinions about combination aesthetics were sometimes in direct conflict with Ben's own tactical preferences, the living gimmick arguing for combinations it found visually coherent, while Ben argued for combinations it found practically useful. A creative tension that the franchise had staged specifically because Skurd's character required it. His eventual decision to leave Ben's Omnitrix, choosing to rejoin his own kind rather than continue as a permanent appendage, was the most emotionally complete gimmick conclusion the franchise had ever produced. A living gimmick, departing as a character rather than being discarded as a device whose replacement model had arrived. The Nemetrix, the Predator counter system. The Nemetrix was Omniverse's most specifically tactical gimmick, not an upgrade to Ben's own transformation system, but a counter system deliberately designed to defeat it. The alien predator Omnitrix that Khyber and Dr. Psychobos had built to transform Khyber's dog into the natural predators of each of Ben's Omnitrix aliens. The Nemetrix worked on a completely different principle from any other transformation device in the franchise. Where the Omnitrix contained sapient alien species whose specific intelligence and capabilities were the source of their power, the Nemetrix contained the predator species of those same aliens. Non-sapient creatures whose evolution had been specifically shaped by millions of years of hunting the exact species that Ben was transforming into. A Nemetrix predator was a specific counter to each Omnitrix form. Not a more powerful version of the same kind of thing, but something that the prey species had no effective response to because its biological vulnerabilities were the product of a predator-prey evolutionary arms race that had been running for millions of years before Ben had ever put the Omnitrix on his wrist. The predatory Buglizard counter to Stinkfly, the Crabdozer counter to Heat Blast, and the Tyrannopede counter to Cannonbolt were the Nemetrix's specific demonstrations that the Omnitrix aliens, for all their individual capabilities, had specific biological vulnerabilities encoded in their evolutionary history. The Gimmicks' most significant narrative implication was the implication about the Omnitrix's broader function. A device containing over 1 million alien species was also a device containing over 1 million species whose specific predators had been shaped by their exact vulnerabilities. Omni-Enhanced forms. The uncontrolled power surge. The first transformation gimmick of the 2016 reboot was the one that the show generated through a season-long narrative arc organized around a sacrifice and its unintended consequences. The most narratively embedded single gimmick in the franchise's history because its specific origin was a specific story event rather than a device upgrade or an external introduction. When Ben used Upgrade to enhance the Omnitrix and the device rebooted with Shockrock's Fulmini energy flooding the alien DNA database, the Omni-Enhanced forms were the result. Each alien in the active roster randomly receiving enhancements charged with Fulmini energy that added rock armor, energy weapons, and new capabilities to the standard forms. The crucial distinction between the Omni-Enhanced gimmick and every other transformation gimmick in the franchise was the absence of control. This was the only transformation gimmick in the reboot that could not be controlled by the user. Ben could not choose to transform into an Omni-Enhanced form. The enhancement activated randomly when the Fulmini energy in the system chose to express itself through the transformation, appearing sometimes and not others with no reliable trigger that the user could consistently replicate. By making the enhanced forms uncontrollable, the show was staging the specific consequence of a sacrifice that had not been fully understood before it was made. The Fulmini energy that enhanced the aliens was the same energy that the High Override was using to attempt planetary invasion, the power boost and the invasion threat sharing the same energy source in a way that made every enhanced transformation a reminder of the season's central conflict. When the Omnitrix rebooted at the end of the second season and fixed the glitch, the Omni-Enhanced forms disappeared simultaneously with the threat that had created them. Omni-Kix armors. The deliberate upgrade system. The second transformation gimmick of the 2016 reboot was everything the Omni-Enhanced forms were not: controlled, deliberate, and operator-activated rather than randomly triggered, the franchise's most efficient single gimmick transition from accidental power to intentional capability. The Omni-Kix armors were high-tech suits generated by the Omnitrix that overlaid a full robotic armoring system onto Ben's current alien form, adding physical protection, specialized weaponry, and environmental survivability that the base forms did not possess. To activate the Omni-Kix form, Ben transforms into an alien and then turns the Omnitrix badge 90 degrees, leaving it in a sideways position, and the user is enveloped into a robotic version of the current alien form, the activation mechanism being a deliberate user action rather than an automatic trigger. The visual contrast between the Omni-Enhanced form's rough rock and energy aesthetic and the Omni-Kix armor's clean, high-tech robotic aesthetic was the most efficient single visual communication of the philosophical difference between the two systems, where the Omni-Enhanced forms looked improvised because they were the result of an accident. The Omni-Kix armors looked engineered because they were. The Omni-Kix forms carried a specific tactical cost that required judgment to manage. The armors caused the Omnitrix to recharge faster, meaning that accessing the Omni-Kix capability came with a shortened operational window that made the decision to activate it a genuine tactical trade-off rather than simply an upgrade to always use when available. Omni-Naut. Armors. Environmental survival at the extreme. The third transformation gimmick of the 2016 reboot was the most situationally specific of the three. The Omni-Orbital flight suits, officially designated Omni-Naut armors, were space armor power-ups that allowed Ben's alien forms to survive in the vacuum of space and extreme aquatic environments where the base forms and even the Omni-Kix armors could not function without additional protection. The Omni-Naut armors are the only reboot transformation gimmick that did not appear in any episode of the television series, appearing exclusively in the theatrical film Ben 10 vs. the Universe, making it the most limited showcase gimmick in the franchise's history in terms of the number of productions that deployed it. 4 alien forms were shown to use the Omni-Naut armor system, their deep space adventure, providing the primary showcase for what the armors were designed to address: the hostile vacuum of space, where standard alien biological survival capability was insufficient regardless of how powerful the aliens' specific combat abilities were. For aliens with natural space or water survivability, the armors provided added protection beyond the baseline environmental tolerance. The Omni-Naut gimmick was the reboot's most practically oriented transformation system, not an accident whose consequences needed to be managed, not a weapon system for enhanced combat output, but survival equipment for environments where the threat was the environment itself, rather than any individual opponent that combat capability could directly address. The Antitrix, Kevin's corrupted counter-Omnitrix. The Antitrix was the 2016 reboot's most philosophically loaded transformation gimmick precisely because it was not Ben's. The corrupted Omnitrix knockoff that Levin had built from stolen Omnitrix schematics, whose hybrid alien forms were deliberately wrong in ways that the original device's safety protocols were specifically designed to prevent. The Antitrix's alien forms were hybrid versions of Ben's standard aliens, each one based on a species in the Omnitrix database, but combined with additional alien DNA or pushed past the biological parameters of the original species, producing forms that were darker in appearance, less stable in biology, and more powerful in specific dimensions than the standard versions. Hotshotted was the Antitrix version of Heat Blast, the fire capabilities amplified past Pyronite baseline, the visual design incorporating elements that pure Methanosian biology did not contain. Wrecking Bolt was the Antitrix version of Cannon Bolt, the combination producing capabilities that exceeded the original species' performance parameters in ways the Omnitrix safety systems would have actively corrected. The Antitrix Baput's most specific narrative function was the function of a mirror, showing what Ben's aliens looked like when the design philosophy prioritized maximum power over the safety protocols and the managed encoding that the Omnitrix had been built to maintain. The franchise used the Antitrix to make its most direct single argument about the value of the Omnitrix limitations. The constraints that Kevin's device had removed were not limitations on the power, but the specific architecture that made the power safe, controlled, and reversible. Their removal producing more power and less everything else that made the power worth having. The Biomnitrix, the most powerful gimmick in franchise history. Ben 10,000's Biomnitrix was the franchise's most powerful single gimmick for the most straightforward possible reason. It took everything the Omnitrix could do and doubled it by putting one on each wrist. The combined operation of 2 linked devices producing a fusion capability that no single Omnitrix had ever been able to achieve through any gimmick preceding it. The Biomnitrix is 2 Omnitrices linked together, allowing the user to perform alien fusions by slamming the 2 gauntlets together. The fusions not being stored in the device but created in real time when the transformation is activated, the biological combination occurring on demand rather than through a malfunction or an accident. Ben 10,000 had spent years developing the Biomnitrix using the minds of his most intelligent aliens. The device was the most sophisticated Omnitrix ever constructed, its fusion capability producing stable, intentional combinations of any two alien DNA samples in the database simultaneously rather than the chaotic, incompatible pairings that the original faceplate malfunction had produced decades earlier. The most powerful fusion the Biomnitrix produced in the show was Atomic X, the combination of Atomix and Alien X, the franchise's second most powerful alien and its most powerful alien, combined into a form that was functionally omnipotent while also charged with nuclear energy. The Biomnitrix communicated the specific thing that every prior gimmick had been building toward. The most powerful version of the device was not the one Azmuth had originally designed, but the one that the franchise's most experienced user had constructed after decades of learning what the device was actually capable of when its possibilities were treated as a starting point rather than a ceiling.